Things change in the NBA all the time. Players move into different periods of their careers, teams change rosters, rules change, but the one thing that never does is the NBA draft is hard. That extends to other sports as well. But you would think that when you get the first, third, fourth, fifth pick of 100 plus players in a single draft pool, when you get to pick who you think is the best guy or one of the 5 best players, it wouldn't be all that difficult to get just a productive, good basketball player, maybe an all-star level guy or above that. But for whatever reasons I'm going to tell you in today's video, pretty much nobody's good at this. Really quickly though, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. The whole goal of Squarespace is to help you grow your presence online through a website-based platform, and they want to make that as easy on you as possible. And as a result, you can click the link down in the description. You can go to squarespace.com for a free trial to start. And then if you want to go ahead and purchase your first website or domain, Squarespace will give you 10% off when you use code SPORTING or click that link in the description. Again, that is 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain at Squarespace. That link is in the description using code SPORTING. Now, what exactly is Squarespace? As I said in the intro, they want to make it as easy as possible on you in order to grow your presence online through a website-based platform. There's a couple of different ways that they really like to do that outside of providing you a discount listed down in the description. One, they make it to where you can pretty much do whatever you want. Whatever vision you have for your website online, Squarespace can help you make it happen. So if you want to sell physical or digital products online, you want to create a shop and a website for that, you can do that. If you want to build a blog or write about something that you're passionate about, build a community around your passions, you can do that as well. One of the other great tools that they have as well is analytics. Coming from someone that has built a presence online, numbers and analytics, knowing where people are coming from is critical. You will not be able to grow your audience online the way that you want to without those numbers, and Squarespace does an awesome job of providing you those analytics so that you can use those numbers to help inform your decision making and continue to grow and build your presence online. So if you want to build a website, try and grow your presence online through something you're passionate about, Squarespace is the place to be. Again, you get 10% off when you click the link down in the description when you use code SPORTING at squarespace.com. And thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Now, if you're somebody that watches all or most of my videos, you probably know that I made a video not too long ago talking about how the league is more talented now than it's ever been, and that teams are generally getting better at drafting, and that they're getting better at developing players. And that's true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are good at it. And there's a lot of different reasons for why this is such a difficult thing. First and foremost, when you think about the lifespan of a basketball player and how much they improve from let's say they pick up the basketball at 10 years old and they get to the league at 19 or 20 years old, and they're going to play until hopefully when you're drafting a player in the top 5, they're going to play until they're 33, 34 and beyond. When you think about that level of development, how good you are at age 10 and how good you are at age 35, the primary amount of development that you have as a basketball player is still to come before you get drafted in the NBA. Players improve more in their time in the NBA than at any other point in their basketball careers because of the development staff they have around them. It's their full-time job. It's the only thing that they do. There's so much more support around them in terms of the medical stuff, nutrition, all that stuff. And as an NBA team, you have to figure out not only who you think the best players are, the best prospects are, but also who's going to maximize this part of their career, because this is what you're evaluating. You're evaluating how well they can shoot the ball, can they score, can they defend, what their physical attributes are. You're evaluating all that stuff, but ultimately the primary and the main thing and the hardest thing to figure out at the time is how much they're going to maximize this part of their career from the NBA draft on. That's the only thing that matters to you, is what their career looks like once they join the NBA. And not only are these 19, 20-year-old kids, sometimes they're a little bit older, but most of the time that's how old they are. Not only are you trying to evaluate them when they're not even like fully, adults at that point, you have no idea what kind of people they're going to be, but you also have to figure out what kind of player they're going to develop into when they still haven't even scratched the surface of what you're hoping they will ultimately become as a basketball player. For example, you go back to the 2013 draft. Giannis is the best player coming out of that draft. It's a draft that actually is surprisingly deep at certain points, but he goes like 15th. He goes like in the middle of the first round, and he's a guy that if you had known at the time, if someone told you magically, hey, Giannis is going to grow a couple more inches, he's going to work really hard in his body, get really strong, and he's going to improve more from the time you draft him to the time that he's 27 or 28, 29, however old he is right now, he's going to improve more in that time span than any player in the league. If you knew that information at the time of that draft, he would have gone first overall, and it wouldn't have been even remotely close. There would have been no discussion. There would have been no debate. You would have picked him because the potential and the upside that represents is just an unbelievable thing. But the problem is you don't know that at the time that you're drafting these players. And no matter how good your development staff is, no matter how good the history of your team is, if you're, the older version of the San Antonio Spurs and they're doing a good job of developing their own players right now, or what Golden State has done over the years with guys like Steph and Clay and Draymond, even if you're one of those teams, it's like, we develop players. It's what we do. You're still going to have misses. For Golden State, for an example, you're still going to have like an Ipke Udoh along the way where you're going to miss, even though you have an opportunity to draft one of the, in your mind, one of the 10 best players, one of the 10 best prospects in the draft class. That's still going to happen. You're still going to have Sacramento drafting guys like Thomas Robinson, Marvin Bagley. You're still going to have all these teams around the league every single year. We have a top 5, we have a top 10 player that just is absolutely no good because you have no idea what this point of their career looks like. You have no idea how hard they're actually going to work once they get to the league, or if they just been working really hard to get there and then they sign a contract. There's so many things that go into it that aren't even related to basketball that have to do with the makeup of these players and the amount of work that they want to put in, because it's a difficult thing to do. Like, you have to be one of the 50 best players in the entire world at what you do. That's difficult across any industry, much less one as physically demanding as being a basketball player, and it is just an incredibly difficult thing to evaluate. But there's another part of this that I feel like people constantly overlook, because I would argue that basketball, more so than other sports, changes more dramatically in a 5 to 6 year span than any other sport that we have, and that makes it really difficult again with that evaluation process, because for the most part things are really streamlined right now. I think that's why we've seen generally more draft success over the last couple of seasons, because guys that are, that a handful of years ago were 16, 17 year in high school prospects that want to make the league when they're 20, they kind of know what the league looked like in 2017, and it kind of looks pretty much the same now, just maybe a little bit more 3-point shooting volume, and they can kind of target their games towards that, and you start to really fill out those roles even at earlier levels of basketball. And I think that's one of the reasons we've seen more success lately. But when you look at the long term, right, when you look at the last 10 years, when you look at the last 15 years of the league, it is a wildly different league now than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, teams were shooting like 27 threes a game at the top of what you would shoot throughout the league. League leading teams like the Orlando Magic with Dwight Howard were shooting less than 30 threes a game. And now the bottom tier teams in the league in terms of 3-point shooting attempts, they're shooting 28 a game. Like the top 3-point shooting attempt team from 10 years ago, Orlando, would not have even shot as many as any team in the league has so far this season. And so when you draft a player in 2011 or 2012 or 2013 that you're hoping is going to be a decade, 15-year plus guy, the league could look wildly different. And so you might draft a post player in 2004, and 10 years later in 2014, the league does not even play remotely the same, and they don't have a place in it. You might draft a guy right now that you think is an incredible shooter. He's a little bit slighter, he doesn't really get to the rim super well, but he's really good in ball screens and just does all the things you want right now out of a big time player, right? A guy sort of like Trae Young, right? That's an incredible pick and roll player, can shoot the ball, can pass, and the league in 10 years might be incredibly physical for whatever reason, or everybody on the floor might be 6'8", and you just can't really have someone like Trae Young out there because of his size. There's no real way to evaluate where the future of the league is going, and so you might draft a player 7th overall, and it makes a lot of sense to bring in this energy 6'10" guy that isn't necessarily really skilled but can guard and can rebound, and then 10 years later it just doesn't work out because that's just not where the league is going. Everybody's constantly copying each other. They're constantly figuring out what the next best thing is to do, and again, that makes it incredibly difficult to evaluate these guys, not just because of how the league is changing, because of how much they still have to, how much work they still have to do in terms of improving as basketball players, and you're dealing still with incredibly young people, and that all in all just makes this such a difficult thing to do. Now, along with all those other factors, some of the teams in the league like to make this even more difficult on themselves, because I firmly believe that there's a lot of different cases of this throughout the history of the league, that it really matters what organization and what team you go to in the NBA. It's just clear that if you look at throughout the history of the league, there are teams that just don't develop players as well. There are organizations that don't put as much of an emphasis on it. There are organizations that have a ton of turnover within the coaching staff, and you're constantly dealing with a new coach, a new development staff, all these different things. And so, for example, DeMarcus Cousins was an incredible player and was incredibly talented and didn't necessarily have the long-term career that you would have hoped that he would have. If he went to, Golden State, or if he went to San Antonio, if he went to one of these, big-time organizations that are known for developing players, his career would have turned out wildly different, assuming that he would have stayed healthy. And so some of these teams just don't prioritize development in the same way. And for example, Golden State, San Antonio, they can pick the exact same player, and that guy can become an all-star if they stay healthy. And other organizations around the league that don't prioritize development, or just aren't as good at it, or have all this turnover and don't have a real foundation as an organization, can pick the exact same guy and they can be a role player. So some teams, if you're watching this video thinking, man, my team just really can't ever get a draft right, you're probably one of those teams that constantly has turnover, constantly has different development staffs, doesn't really have a clear idea of what they want this player to turn into, because year to year the roster's changing, the coaches are changing, the roles are changing, and nobody knows exactly what to focus on and what to prioritize. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a difficult thing, and it's one of those things where it's like a 50-50 shot a lot of the times, and when you're drafting the top 5, you're in the top 10, and the percentage of getting a big time player shrinks and shrinks and shrinks the further down you go in the draft. For example, like we have Giannis, who before last year, or before Jokic won an MVP, was the latest drafted league MVP ever, right? And then all of a sudden you've got Nikola Jokic, who's the first second round MVP ever. He's a guy that was drafted, in the middle of the second round, suddenly becoming an MVP. So it works both ways. Like, not only do teams suck at drafting in terms of missing on guys, that end up being really good later in the draft, but of course, as we've talked about throughout the entire video, you've got your FK Udos, you've got your Thomas Robinsons, you've got your Nick Stauskas, you've got your Jimmer Fredette's within the top 10. And the other thing that I would point to is just, it's hard. Like, it's a difficult thing to become a really good basketball player, and not everybody's going to make it. It doesn't matter if you're picking the 10 best guys out of 100 plus draft eligible guys that consolidates, pieces of multiple high school and college draft classes all put together. Some guys just aren't going to make it, and there's just not enough players to be big time guys to have 6 players, the entire top 6, become all-stars in every single draft class. That's just not how the numbers work out, and it's just a really difficult thing to do. And I honestly think that more so than any other league, this differentiates big time organizations from teams that aren't that good perennially. If you can figure it out, if you can hit on a couple of these, if you can get Steph, Clay, and Draymond within a few years span, Kevon Looney, all these different guys Golden State's brought in over the years. If you're San Antonio and you can find gems like Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, of course, getting Tim Duncan at the top of the draft, Kawhi, drafting and developing him, that's the differentiator. You can talk about free agency, you can talk about trades, you can talk about smart roster construction and all these different things. But if you can't draft, it's going to be really tough for you unless you're one of the handful of organizations that are big time free agency destinations. And if you're Sam Presti and you're a guy that can evaluate talent and figure out a way to properly develop it, it's one of the biggest advantages in sports, not just because of what it does for your own team, but because of how difficult it is for all of these other teams to figure it out as well. And that difficulty level is exactly why there's so much interest in the draft every single year. It's why it's an incredible event. It's something that everybody pays attention to because everybody wants to see, hey, are they going to screw this up? Is this guy going to be a big time steal later on in the draft? It probably has more coverage than anything else apart from the finals that we have in the NBA. And a big reason why is because a lot of teams, pretty much everybody, isn't very good at it.